Let's strategize together. Let's hear it from an expert. Join the conversation, it's informative and free. You and me, let's talk some strategy. Now here's your host, Morin-van.
Hello everybody, my name is Morin-van, and today we're going to talk about authentic storytelling. I'm very excited to introduce you to my guest in just a moment, but before we do, I want to make sure that you are welcomed. If you are watching this live on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, X right now, or maybe on YouTube, let us know where you're watching us from live. And if you're watching this on the replay and you have questions throughout the show, make sure you put #replay with your question in the comments. Last but not least, a special shout out to those of you who listen to Strategy Talks as a podcast. So before I introduce my guest and bring him onto the stage today, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Social Insider. They are the intuitive dashboard for social media analytics, reporting, and competitors analysis for brands and agencies. If you need data, you need Social Insider. So here is today's guest, Ryan Koral from Tell Studios. Hi, Ryan. How are you today?
What's up, Doreen?
I am so excited that you're here. I was on your podcast a while back.
Yeah.
It was so fun. So now we're on my podcast, and this time we're going to talk about authentic storytelling. So, but before we do, I want people to know, who is Ryan Koral? So Ryan's journey, shaped significantly by his own higher education experience, has evolved into a dynamic career as a seasoned documentary filmmaker and entrepreneur with over 18 years in the industry. He brings the transformative power of his experiences to his work, showcasing the critical role of higher education through video and authentic storytelling. His passion for fostering lasting partnerships with clients helps craft narratives that inspire, spotlight legacies, and bolster institutional growth. And that's really what I want to talk about, because our audience on Strategy Talks is a combination of marketers who need to grab the stories from their clients, and of course, entrepreneurs, authors, coaches who have this story inside them and don't know how to get it out. And so I'm excited to talk to you today.
Oh man, yeah, I'm excited to talk about all of those things.
Lots of pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Yeah, should I just start talking, because I feel
absolutely.
like you might need to dial me in here. I was just thinking, as you were reading all of that, I was just thinking about when I first got into video. It was about 20 years ago. And then over the first 2 years, I was working at the college that I had attended, and convinced them to buy me a video camera and a computer so that I could start making videos to tell the college's story. Because I was watching the church that we were attending, they played these very powerful story videos. And every weekend I'm just like weeping at these like transformational stories. And I was like, that's what I want to make. So I brought that to the college. I got to start playing, and then eventually I was like, I need to do just video full time. And so I ended up leaving the college, and my wife and I were newly married. We had like little to no debt, and it was just like, let's just see if this works. And so I got into it. But I remember as I was thinking about the kind of stories that I really wanted to tell, it was like real, human, authentic stories. I didn't want to make commercials for TV that felt, scripted and canned and all of that. I wanted to be able to create like real emotion and to make people cry. And as I was, trying to figure out a name for the business, I just kept going back to this idea that everybody has a story. And I know today when I look at like anybody that's in, marketing, branding, video, whatever, that's like, that's somebody's tagline. It's almost everybody's tagline. Everybody has a story. Let us tell yours. But really, most people, even entrepreneurs who are doing amazing work and impacting, so many lives, a lot of entrepreneurs entrepreneurs would just say like, yeah, like, my story, whatever, like I know the work, I know how to help people, but it's like, no. Like you have gold inside of you. And I don't care who you are, where you come from, whether or not you are an entrepreneur, but seeing as this is the audience, it's like, if you are creating an impact, if you're passionate, you really care about this work, man, when people can understand your why, I mean, that's where when you've got competition and people around you, when they can really understand your why, you're going to draw the right people, your ideal audience, versus just throwing out a blanket statement of like, here's who I help. That's helpful to know that. But when people can really understand like your why, your motivation, your history, how you got to where you are, what you really care about, like that's the thing that's going to allow you to work with your bestest people.
Yeah. So, how do you convince somebody? Because, say you're a marketer and you're starting with a new company, there are people out there who feel like that's part of their personal, that's too personal. I don't want to share the why, or I don't want to get too personal on, say, social media. I don't want to really tell that story. But there's always the why, but they don't necessarily think it's important enough. How do we convince somebody? Or how do you get the right story? See, that's the other part. I think sometimes we get stories out of, at least I feel like we get stories out of clients, but they're not really the right stories to tell. And they're not hitting the right way. So how do you go about identifying that? Do you just get people in a room and just get them talking? Like, what's the magic there?
Yeah, I mean, convincing is like that's just one thing I don't really like to do. I think that whenever we've chatted with a client or potential client in the past, and they're very hesitant to share their story for reasons like you said, like, oh, like I just don't, like, it's not that important, whatever. I just don't think it's going to do what it needs to be, or I don't like to be on camera. Any of those kinds of excuses. Then the very next thing I would say, like, okay, well, one thing that would be really powerful to do is to tell some of the transformation stories of your clients and the people that you're working with. So immediately people are like, oh yeah, let's do that. But eventually, as people start seeing the impact, and you see this today now with like bigger brands, people doing these like, real life, like mini documentaries that's day in the life of, or, transformation, like, what was my life like before working with this brand and what is it like now? So I think when you can start focusing on the transformation, and then for any, if you start working with a client and you're just like so convinced that their story needs to be told, it's like any convincing that I might do is like, do you believe in your mission? Do you believe in the work that you're doing? And if so, then you have to believe that the message is bigger than your whatever thing is in the way of you telling your story. Oh, I don't want to be on camera. I don't like how I sound. I don't like how I look, or I think there's better stories out there. But if you really are passionate about the message and your mission, then that should definitely go in front of whatever insecurities you might have. It's so important. Like here's the thing, an entrepreneur probably goes to networking events, workshops, conferences, and they put themselves out there, and they're meeting people, and they might be introverted, they might not like doing that, but they understand the importance of it. And video is the same way. It's like you've got to be able to take some of those same things that you get when you're meeting people to be able to bring it onto a screen. That's the next best thing than meeting somebody in person, is for them to like be able to see you, kind of feel what kind of person you are and what you really care about. When you can do that in a video, man, you are winning.
Yeah, that's so good. Absolutely right. You're right. And I have a client who actually I was talking to this morning that I've had for a long, long time, and she was very, very brave and told a very personal and scary story years ago. And she just asked me to rewrite the story because the local newspaper is going to print it. It's a story worth sharing again and again. And so I helped her condense the story, and it's very, very personal, but it is a story of why she's doing what she's doing, and the world needs to know that because it could help somebody else. So Absolutely. I get that. So, where do we start? Storytelling has a long, long history. Before we had words to write, before we had, books to read and to print, people were telling stories for thousands of years. So, what makes a good story, Ryan, in your book? What does it have, a beginning, a middle, an end? Does it have to have, what are some of the elements? Because, those of us who are watching and listening, we remember the books that we read, but we don't always analyze why we like it. Do you have some things for us to consider when we're starting to think about the story we need to tell, of a framework?
Yeah, I think before we jump into that, I just wanted to mention that I have an email list, and I'll email my list, a couple of times a month. And sometimes I get replies. I'm always trying to get people to give me feedback, and but it's always the emails that I send out where I'm either very vulnerable in the email itself, or I'm pointing people to a video where I share some, just like some real raw, like somewhat hard stuff to share. And I know everybody right now is like, I did not want to, I don't want to get vulnerable. But if I'm a big Brene Brown fan, and she, I think, has done so much good work to help encourage and inspire us to try to be more real and authentic and vulnerable. Yeah. But when I've written vulnerable emails, it is insane the amount of responses that I get. People like, oh my gosh, thank you. It feels so nice knowing that you don't have it all together. I can, but like the trust in connection, just, it's insane how that works. So when we're thinking about, like, what is the framework, or the most basic framework is I think, starting with the end in mind, like what are you going after here? Like, what is the hope? So if it's an email, or if it's a video that you're making, like, why are you making it? What is the call to action? And the call to action might just be, you want to build trust and you want to build connection. So there is no like, sign up to my list, do this thing, or whatever. And that can be a call to action. You just want people to feel a certain way. You want to draw them in. And maybe what you're hoping is that more people that, or you would get people to say either this person is totally for me, or like, nope, not a fit here. That's a win as well.
Sure.
So when you have a clear idea of what it is that you're after, then hopefully whatever story that you're going to tell will help you get closer to that call to action. And I think, at the core of an interesting story, it really is like, what is the transformation? Like, what happened? Like, something had to have happened. And there's like, the before and the after. So yeah, it could be a 3-part, kind of thing. Like, everything was fine in my life, but then this happened, I lost everything, and then I found this, or I started doing this, or I stopped doing this, and then I don't have everything together, but man, my life is so much better, or I've been able to help so many more people because of this thing. So it's really like, what is that thing? What is it? What was that moment, or a moment that changed you, that made you think different, made you act different, made you treat people different? What was that moment that in your business, if you started a business, why did you decide to start a business? For most people, I would say they didn't start a business just because they wanted to make a lot of money. There was something that changed, a light bulb that went off, something significant happened in their life. Maybe they lost their job, that they had for 20 or 30 years. And they were forced in a corner, and they realized, like, oh my gosh, this is the only other thing I know how to do is this thing. And I care about it so much. I never thought that I could make money at it, but I didn't have another option. And so I charged somebody for it, and then realized, like, oh my gosh, maybe I could do this thing. And, so for me, when I first started doing video, we were creating wedding films for a long time. And a friend of mine said, hey, you should consider doing work with businesses. And I was like, I don't want to, like, I don't care about helping a company make more money.
Right.
And what he said was, dude, you have to realize that anybody that starts a business, there's a why. And they had a significant moment, an epiphany that meant a lot, that changed their lives. And that's why. So if you can like get to the heart of that, that's so interesting and so powerful.
Yeah. So earlier you were talking about you started a business because you wanted to tell those stories. Is that your why? Is that is that why you started your business?
Yeah. I mean, I think I believe that people matter. Their stories matter. I ran into so many people that are like, no, but nothing. I don't have any great stories. And it's like, you do. You just don't know how. You haven't unearthed them, or you haven't walked alongside somebody else that can help you do that, because we're our own worst critic. We don't believe we have much to offer. And, once you start to get to know somebody and you're learning their story, it's like, wow, that's powerful. But to them, it's just before we hit record here, you're like, hey, we're talking about authentic storytelling. I'm like questioning. I'm like, do I know anything about authentic storytelling? I'm like, this is what I do. Of course I do.
Right. Exactly. Well, and that's what kind of where, does somebody need help getting the story out of them? And I think the answer is yes, because all of us are in our own head. Totally. And whether it's inspiration from Brene Brown, who I also love, or talking to a friend, a mastermind group, or being on a podcast with somebody like you who does this for a living, I think when we start thinking about our why and start telling that story, those elements, especially when you talk about transformation, I think that's really good. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, what was that transformational moment? How were you before and how are you now? Or how was your client before and how is your client now? And what is that transformation? And I think that's amazing. I started my business incidentally because my youngest son went to kindergarten. I have four kids, and they were in middle school and elementary school, and then the youngest one started kindergarten. I'm like, I have 7 hours a day. What on earth am I gonna do? Forgetting about having them home all summer and sick days and all of that. But that's when I started my business. It's like, what am I gonna do with the rest of my life? And so that was definitely a transformation for me, because now I am half of a team that supports our family, Now it's really changed the dynamics of our family and how the kids interact with me now that they're adults, as also, being the second breadwinner. And so that is definitely a story. And I love that you said everybody has that story. So elements, you were talking about the transformation. How does a good story start? If we're talking about video, you're a filmmaker, documentary. Is there anything that you can tell us maybe what not to do? Like, it might not be as easy to say, well, go do this because this is what I do. But are there some things that you like, we really shouldn't do if we're going to tell a story?
Yeah, don't read from a teleprompter.
Okay.
Because that can come off very inauthentic, unless you're very good at. I would say if you struggle with landing the plane, my hand is raised because yes, sometimes I do have a hard time stopping, ending when I'm just in conversation, and I think for me, I'll write a basic script and I'll add ums and uhs, or just I'll create not distractions, but things that might seem like, oh, that he's just like shooting from the hip. I'm like, sometimes I am. I mean, like right now, I'm not reading from a script, but yeah, I mean, I think that's I would hope that reading your story from a teleprompter would be an obvious one, but I know it's not, because I remember early on we filmed this woman's story, and it's an amazing story, but she's like, I want to read it, and I'm like, okay. And she read it and she wasn't comfortable, like, shooting from the hip. And I just remember when we finished that video, they loved it. They thought it was so good. But the thing that was missing was the heart, like the stumbles, the real rawness of somebody sharing. So as I'm thinking through this, for anybody that I would love a takeaway for somebody to say, like, okay, like maybe my story is worth telling. where would I even start? And I would just say bringing somebody else in, whether it's a friend, a spouse, or somebody else, and having just some questions to start with, because again, we struggle with imposter syndrome, like,
Sure.
my story really isn't that big of a deal. You just need somebody else to be able to ask some of the hard questions and to get you talking and to kind of pull that out. Now, obviously, if you can, have somebody like Doreen, somebody that's a professional, help, knowing like what are some of those important things, that's going to probably help you get there faster. But doing it on your own, especially if you've never done it, is going to be really, really difficult, because we're just going to constantly tell ourselves like, that's nobody probably really cares about that. But we don't really know until we start sharing it. And then people start giving us feedback of like, wow, I can't believe you went through that. I went through that too. And high five, because now I feel like I'm not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm telling you, if you're watching this, listening to this, if you want to see some storytelling, amazing things, look for the things that go viral on TikTok. Sometimes I just saw one today where a librarian pulled out picture books for high schoolers. Now, talk about doing something different. She's like, high schoolers are told to read all these books. They're not interested. High schoolers don't want to read. They have to read for school. They don't want to read for pleasure. She's like, how about going back to the basics of picture books? And she had a bunch of books that talk about, going to kindergarten and being afraid to make friends and difficulties. And people look at me because I look different or I'm disabled or, all these things that teenagers, that angst that they have. And she's like, go back to reading. With high school, I was like, how authentic is that video? She was brilliant. I was like, I saw this story. I clicked on it. I watched her TikTok. It's like, this got me because I had teenagers. I did read to them. I know their struggle of reading in high school. So I thought that was brilliant. So there's lots of examples out there if you're not sure what story to tell, of doing that. Now, is it okay to chop up your story? Like, we're talking about your documentary, the longer movies. Now that we're in the age of vertical video and TikTok and Reels, and how do we go about that? Is it okay to say part 1, part 2, part 5? Is it a series? Is it, are there any tips that you can give us there that could help us?
Yeah, I think, the way that people are consuming content today, you've got to hook them. So if you're going to post your story on TikTok and I'm going to start my story. Well, let's see, I was born in, 1977, grew up in Metro Detroit area, had mom and a dad, and that's like how my story starts. Like people are going to be like, what's in this for me? Right. Cause that's what everybody's thinking when they click on this thing. But if my story starts, hey, in 7th grade, the summer going into 7th grade, my mom and dad sat us down. We'd never had a family meeting before, and they said they're getting divorced, and it changed everything for me. And that's where my story starts. And then I can say, like, I was born in 77, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think cutting up your story, the hook is so important with the way that social media and media is being consumed today. If you're creating a 30 or 40 minute documentary, like some of these longer format pieces that we're creating, those aren't, that 40 minute piece isn't going to sit on TikTok, but we could definitely cut up, parts of that 40 minute piece and put that and use that all over social. And it's really going to come down to like, okay, is there some kind of a hook? Is there what's interesting about this? And once you get them hooked, then yeah, part 2, 3, 4, 5, you don't have to necessarily have hooks. Although if there are teasers or things that can help get people to stick around, like you're going to want to, be able to touch on those as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more about social. If you're making a video, where should stories live? Are you saying on your own website, on YouTube? Like if somebody, say nobody knows Ryan Koral, a lot of people do, but say they just meet you today for the first time and they're like, okay, I want to know Ryan's story. Where does your story live?
Yeah. It needs to be in all the places, okay. And in probably different formats for each of the places. And even I'm realizing that too, because it wasn't until about a year ago that we started putting some energy behind social. It was just like we're creating content, we're creating social stuff for all of our clients. We had dabbled in it probably a decade ago. Nothing was really catching, and I'm like, this is just a waste. Like, we've got good business, we know how to network, we know how to explore and find opportunities, and social just hasn't worked for us. So like, let's stop wasting energy there. But as we're launching a new brand, I'm doing more coaching and helping online. I've got my podcast and whatnot. It just makes more sense. And we're finally starting to see some traction. Like, oh yeah, you actually, if you have a very specific audience you're going after and you know what their problems are, it's much easier to create the kind of content that gets viewed. So on your, about page, that's a great spot to have, a 5-minute, a 10-minute long story or multiple stories of your story. And then, on your LinkedIn, maybe have a teaser of that. And then for the full, about me, click on here and it takes you to your about page. And then breaking it up into, 30 to 60 second snippets of the most powerful moments of your story. And again, pointing people to the longer version of that story, or breaking it up into multiple parts on TikTok, Reels, YouTube Shorts, etc. Definitely the full version on YouTube. YouTube right now can cut up your story using AI and say, okay. I mean, we've used multiple AI softwares to try to find the magic clips inside of longer form videos. And it's like, it's crazy how far it's come. It's got a ways to go before it's actually, I think it can move people's hearts. But still, using all the platforms and knowing that each one needs to kind of be served a little bit differently. And then also always having okay, what is the call to action? What's the next step for people? Being very intentional, whether that's in the video itself or in the captions, directing people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you talked about earlier the tip you gave, don't read off of the teleprompter, but do you recommend having some sort of a script?
Yeah, having an outline for sure, super duper helpful. I think having a very, like, let's say you interviewed me for my story. I never shared my story before. You interviewed me. I would want to have an opening line and a closing line that would probably be a little bit more handcrafted, and in practicing that and kind of rehearsing that in a very like conversational way. I think that could be pretty powerful, unless you're just a natural storyteller and you know how to open and you know how to close. But I think those are two very important parts, and those could be done on the back end. So we do this 30-minute interview, and then it's like, okay, let's spend 10 minutes and just try to think, like, how can we open? What would be a good opener? What's kind of the philosophy of this video? And then how can we close this? So reading from that or practicing it, saying it 5 or 10 times until you get it, exactly how you want it. That's probably what I would recommend.
That's really, really good, actually. I love that. I've seen people do that, of course, with podcasts, and they record the podcast and then they go back and they record that intro. This is what we're going to talk about, or these are the outcomes, and then the outro of, if you've listened to this and you're at the end, here's the call to action. This is what I gained. So yeah, that's fantastic. So Ryan, how can people connect with you, and where can they find you on socials?
I'm not on social, just kidding. On social, pretty much all the handles are my first and last name is Ryan, Ryan, and last name is Koral, Koral. So at Ryan Koral, probably spend the most of my time on LinkedIn. That's where most of our content is shared. And I have a portfolio of work plus like quality content for people that want to be telling better stories, want to know how to use video in different ways. If you go to tellstudios.com/secrets, we have a whole series. It's video marketing secrets. I share some software tools that we use that make editing incredibly easy. I've got a gear checklist if you want to kind of up level your gear and you're on a shoestring budget, or you've got a lot of money. We've got kind of different. Here's different gear for different scenarios, lights, those kinds of things. But if you go to tellstudios.com/secrets, you can sign up for that and get what I think is quality content if you're interested in up-leveling your storytelling and or what your videos look like and sound like.
That's fantastic. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes, and I'll put it in the comments below, so you can just click through and get that information. Ryan, thank you so much for being with me today, and I'm very excited. I might need to retell my story. I think I have a lot of stories in me that I'm so busy getting it out of my clients that I don't tell enough of my own.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you being with us today and sharing some of these great tips. And if you're watching and you're listening and you're excited to take this advice and say, it's time, I need to tell my story, connect with Ryan and Tell Studios. I'll be back next week with another episode of Strategy Talks. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Doreen.